needs. But I think to get a handle on it, we have to start somewhere. But I would like to interject that one of the principles that guides us is keeping in mind that we don't have to be responsible for all of King County here in this, geographic place to the detriment of what our own vision for the city is. So I think it's good that we have a calendar so we can kind of keep that in mind and move forward with some workable principles that can be flexible enough to accommodate maybe further research that the council does in the future and public requests as they come forward in the public comments and any hearings.
Thank you. Anybody else? No? Go ahead, Arthur.
Okay. Support efficient, well-planned infrastructure, focusing on transportation network and facilities that accommodate long-range growth needs. I think I sort of put this along the same lines as your downtown, is that housing and transportation systems. I think Commissioner Nugent's brought that up before, just sort of that whole integration. A lot of work going on in Sound Transit right now. You may have heard of King County's trying to do a funding program targeted TOD, so they do want to support housing that's more affordable right near where the transits are and stuff. So I think that's where we sort of that's where this concept comes from. It can also be a way that's a way cities can also support affordable housing. In other words, often you ask a private development to take care of those needs. Is there ways that the community can take care of that need so that and in exchange for that development having more affordability? So those are a couple different ways that you can look at the infrastructure issue. Any questions on that one? Encourage and facilitate a culture that values and supports a diverse population, inclusive, family-friendly, supports safety, healthy, and welfare of all its citizens. So different people of different income levels in your community, so that's where the connection was there. Encourage volunteerism and public involvement and work as a good partner with citizens and good government. So that was a combination of two things. One, it's a community effort. So think about working with the community. And then the second is, as you do things, also be open and transparent and ask for community input. So those seem to be pretty important values in different documents in your community. So that's where that one came from. And then finally...
I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yes, I'm sorry. No.
How does that relate to affordable housing?
So this is sort of their process of working on, not at this stage necessarily as much, but when you start going into the specific things that are your high priority strategies, what's your process for coming up for how you want to deal with them? And what we're saying here is it seems very important to your community that process involve community engagement as you get to that point.
Does that change how we're going to review this?
No, because this is a work program we're basically doing now, so in other words, and just to sort of repeat what I said at the last meeting, let's say you put accessory dwelling units as a high priority strategy. That just says you want to do all the research on that because you think it has promise. You may get into that and decide you don't want to change a thing. But for right now, you're making it a high priority by saying we think it's something we should look at really hard. Given the different strategies out there, given what we know about our community, this we think is an important one to look at. That is not making any recommendations on what any changes should be at this time. It would be then when you do your work program, you'll undertake some of the high priorities. Then you'll be getting into the real guts of what exactly should we do? Is it community education outreach? Should we help people finance when they want to do ADUs? Do we change our regulations? Do we do other things like that? So, okay.
Go ahead.
And then the last one is economic base that provides a range of goods and services, offers quality employment, and supports local businesses. And there it is, as you can see, helping to grow and retain independent community-scale retailers, specifically called out, support growth of health-related cluster, and office space employment. One of the things we are seeing in other cities is when they survey local businesses, increasingly they're saying recruitment and retention of employees is getting more and more challenging for them, and especially in the areas of retail and health industries. So that's why we put that out there, is that linkage that part of what you're doing with your housing is creating the environment for the companies that want to grow. They can also have their employees have choices of where if they so choose to live in a community. So that's what that item is regarding. Okay?
Thank you.
Okay? So it sounds like at this point, the form it's in right now looks reasonable, and as we go forward, there might be more conversation, but for now, useful tool for you and covered the bases as you were hoping it would. I mean, I don't know if you know some of your other vision statements. I don't know if there's other topic areas you didn't see in here that you were expecting to maybe be rating for all of these strategies. Usually, most cities have used a 3-tier of some sort system. You could use more numbers if you want, or letters, or however you want to do it. And the purpose of the 4 or 5 columns to the left of that, or right of that, are to try to find, after we do some conversation, sort of, are there certain kinds of priorities here that make the most sense for us to populate these columns with so that we can compare strategies to? We didn't feel we wanted to jump into that quite yet. We wanted to see how your conversation was going. But the attempt is, this could be 1 column, 5 columns, however many. This is where we're trying to reflect some of the main principles so that you can show that work when we're done. This sort of help show why certain things might have gotten higher priority or lower priorities when we're done. So that's one that I think, because we're sort of evolving this process, we wanted to hear for night. So in a meeting or two, we'll actually take your comments and try to actually suggest what some of those columns might be. But the idea is that they'll build upon the principles criteria sheet. That's what we're thinking at this point. And then we always have another column. Yes?
So I'm looking at the matrix, and I see the columns, but I think you're talking about a blank column somewhere where we fill it in based on our priorities.
Like right here.
It's 8.5.
Other council
You need
action?
to turn to the 8.5 by 14 version. That was at your.
Oh,
Right.
Yeah.
This.
And
Okay.
see-
Thank you.
Yeah.
Never mind.
Okay. Just wanted to be clear. Okay. So now, so that's the format of the document. Then the other formatting is how do we group strategies? And so we have created, I think, let's see, we have created 4 main sections. One is regulations. The second is, and those, it takes a couple pages on those. It's probably best if you use like the handout as was just referred to. Second is direct and indirect assistance, so that's where cities are using its resources. And you'll see a number of those are shaded because those are more in the direct category, which the council said they wanted to be more lead on those conversations. The third is regional and statewide, so how do you plug into efforts that are broader? And then the last category is sort of the monitoring, oversight. What do we do over time? You know, where do we look and stuff over time? So this becomes sort of a evolving document or evolving process that has a life of actions or planning, actions, watch, react, and then go through a process 4 or 5 years down the road. See what the results of the efforts that you make, and then update this kind of strategy plan in the future. Okay, so that's, yes.
I just want to let you finish first, and then I'll propose something.
Okay. Well, that's sort of the 4 main sections, and then I was just going to point out, assuming that we would start at the top, and just point out that in the regulatory section, we thought there were 3 pretty significant subcategories.
And when I say finish, I meant before you got into the merits of, I meant you're giving an overview, and now you're going to get into the merits of each proposal, right?
No, not yet. I've got 1 more minute.
I'm sorry.
And then, okay.
You just let me know. I don't want to.
So all I'm trying to point out is in the regulatory section, we thought that there were 3 very distinct areas, or 3 or 4. I guess we had, 3 distinct areas that we grouped we made subcategories. So the first are ones that may not on the surface feel like, it depends on who you talk to, how directly do they impact affordability? They're not explicitly affordable housing regulations, but they're things that deal with housing supply and diversity. So that's the first section. The second section is related, and just to repeat a comment I made several meetings ago, or when I worked with you on the housing element, is that in my mind, this first section is a really important section, because the first thing you do is lay the groundwork of what the market can do, and our goal is to get, in this country, is market creates our housing for the vast majority of what we do. we want the market to be able to meet as much of the need as absolutely possible, okay? So even though we're supposedly focusing on affordable housing, we think there's enough direct, correlation between general housing supply and affordable housing that this merits conversation and discussion. The second section is when we get into regulations that deal with kind of more specific population needs, specifically seniors, people with disabilities and stuff. So that's what the second section is. So when you're dealing with special populations who typically have lower income or often have a lower income as well. And then the third section are regulations that have a more direct impact on affordability. There's often a direct linkage between the regulation and some outcome related to some level of affordability. So now I'm done with the overview of the organization.
Thanks.
Can you go back to that last section and describe it again?
So it's regulations that have a more direct correlation to creating housing that are either explicitly or almost explicitly have some level of affordability other than what the market might do on its own.
Okay, so in a way, it's like creating that special niche that could be not provided for if market drives everything.
Well, and actually often these are trying to get the market to be the player, but you do it in a very explicit way that results in certain explicit price points. Okay. But you're still often relying on the private market to try to make these tools work.
Okay.
Yeah,
it's more the product that you're creating than it is who's doing it, because these are trying to assist both groups that work explicitly on affordable housing, but also to sort of create an environment where the market can sort of behave the way it normally does, but you translate some public action into value and you capture that in the product and some of the product, and as a result of the action where you create value. So it's sort of, my old boss used to say, we used to do development, that when a city did a rezone, they were essentially ringing the cash register. But the company I work for in California would say, tonight though, council, it's going to be different with us. We're going to put that value you're creating through your public action back into some of the units meeting an explicit affordability level. And it's sort of the same with ADUs. You're saying to homeowners, hey, we're letting you do something a little bit different, and that product you're creating we recognize has some level of affordability that we otherwise would not typically see.
So I want to respond to that, and I'm glad Carol brought that up. What are these different sections addressing specifically? And then I wanted to propose something. So my first thought is I look at these three categories underneath the heading regulatory approaches. I look at number 3 as our primary responsibility with the task that the City Council assigned to us. We're asked to propose market solutions for affordable housing. We got number 3.
There's two important things to look at in that chart. The first is, it goes like this usually, okay? Markets get strong, they build a lot, either the economy gets weak or they overbuild, and rents sort of stabilize themselves. And so you have, here's affordable at 60 and here's affordable at 80, and it kind of moves like this within that range for forever. The last 4 or 5 years, we've had a steeper curve than I've seen in a long time, and it's been a longer, sustained upward trend to now we've hit, remember I showed you this data with a year ago data, and we had just hit 80% of median in East King County as a whole, and King County I think even as a whole. We're now shooting way above, and you guys are almost at 80% of median for your average rents. Now, either we're in for a really, really big correction, or we're getting to be a market condition that's a little different than I've seen for the last, the first 20 years I was here. Still not as bad as California, much worse than California, but that's kind of an undercurrent that's going on out there, even with all the construction that's occurring. So that's, I think, puts even more pressure to help.
4 is table that talks about households by income category. That's about as distilled as I can give you at the moment.
What's that table number again?
H-A, it's on housing element page 5-4, and that says that 20% of households in Kenmore fall within the standards defined as very low or low income. So 11% are less than 30% of median, 9% are 30 to 50% of median, 15% are 50 to 80% of median, and 65%, a large amount, are greater than 80% of median. But that shows you what the breakout is of, that was in 2011. That's that data from there. So I don't think 20% is an insignificant number of Kenmore residents. So again, I think if we go back to this information, and it again was all included in the July 19th packet, if you want to read through it as you're thinking, I wasn't expecting you to memorize it or anything like that, but just maybe pick out the key points that you would use to frame your thoughts about this table that has been presented.
Yes,
so
thank you.
for example,
that would be useful.
Yeah.
What I would also like to have, and what I was primarily wanting to look at, is to be able to go back to the decisions we made about particularly the regional business zones and what the decisions we made in terms of density and what we thought the capacity would be for new building there.
right,
And that's where I'd like to go through and say, okay, with this density level, ideally somebody would tell me this, would say, okay, that's going to attract housing that's going to be affordable for this income level. I don't expect you're going to have that, but I think a reasonable person can go through there and say, well, at this density level, this is going to be high, medium, or low income. It's going to be affordable to high, medium, low income. And at least for myself, that would give me a sense of what have we addressed already.
yeah. So the
where we may
capacity.
have to have something else to.
The capacity information is on 5-10 that talks about existing housing units and capacity. And that was done and incorporated the changes that you made for the regional business zone. It doesn't break it out by income level, so that's something we could think
But I think
about.
let me see if I understand what you're saying. Let's take the different zones in the community. We know what the remaining capacity is. And then looking at what the market is building today in those zones, what will the price points be, all things just being what they are. We have 300 housing, single-family homes, and they're being built for $700,000 a unit. The more recent ones, and in this zone, they're building multifamily across the street, and those are coming in, and that's affordable to 100% of median. That's what it sounds like. Something that
Yes,
simple,
you're
that
very
rough
close
or
to
that approximate, would that get at what you're kind of trying to understand?
It would. I think the regulation we have in place right now has calibrated a future distribution or portfolio of housing out there, whether it happens in a year or 20 years. That's what we've laid out there. So it would be nice to know what that really looks like in terms of.
The overriding point of that analysis, and I'd be happy to get into details as to why, from what I read on this, is that all new housing helps affordability for a couple of reasons. I don't know if you've read it, but
Not only did I read it,
you're really familiar with it.
I'm very familiar with it, and I then went to their source and asked them what their thought was on the report, and they sent me another report that was written 3 months later, which did not refute what they said, that market is part of the solution, an important part, but that the conclusions that were derived in that report were not what they were trying to completely say. And that's from UC Berkeley, which was their source. So I have another article that was published, because there's usually two sides to stories, and I've heard these, and I worked in California for a long time, and it's an ongoing debate, and I think that's why we're saying, I think Juanita Bay is great, increased supply, I get that. The point that we're making is, can you, as a result of that process, are you creating benefits that when you are doing something like that, I'm not saying inclusionary. Inclusionary is used as a term that means everywhere in a city, and I had to write an inclusionary program in Bellevue when I first came because council wanted it.